Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavors of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction tech or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from a very warm and muggy Auckland in New Zealand.
Hi, this is Zack Semke coming to you from a freezing Seattle. We actually have a little snow on the ground, which is not super common here. It's 32 degrees and cold.
Well, it feels like it's almost 32 Celsius here. But
right. I should specify Fahrenheit.
But it's getting up to the high 20s, and I think yesterday it was around 90% relative humidity outside.
Oh, man.
With some thunderstorms outside, yeah. So we've had this big, massive, warm, moist air over the country for quite a while, and quite a lot of rain, which is good for now. But the farmers are always a little bit nervous. They say that they're never more than 2 weeks away from a drought. So we'll see how things go. I think it's still not sure whether it's going to be a warm, wet start to the year.
Right.
So we'll see. We got some cool stuff to go over. We've got a great interview. But before we get into that and thanking some people, I just want to point people to the Passive House Accelerator website, because Mary James published an article there. By the time this comes out, it would have been out for a little while. This came out on December 16th, all about PHPP 10. It's a piece that Mary's been working on for a little while, and she's actually reached out and talked to a few people who got their hands on PHPP new version, and it's got some comments in there. I don't understand the technical details enough myself, but I do know that there are some big upgrades in there, some slight changes in methodology of some of the way things are calculated. So check that out, and it'd be good to get some discussion going on that as well, and find out what people's experience are if they've upgraded from version 9 to version 10.
Excellent.
All right, and of course there's lots of other stuff going on as well. Even though it's feels like we're kind of winding down towards the end of the year, there's still plenty of stuff going on, which you can find on the Accelerator website. You can also find our sponsors over there. So, Zach, we should do a shout out to them.
Indeed. Yeah, everything we do at the Accelerator, including Passive House Podcast, comes thanks to our fine supporters. So our founding supporters are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stokecorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsors are Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Prosoco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. All right. Now, this week we've got a interview with Mark from the New Buildings Institute. Now, I hadn't heard a lot about the New Buildings Institute. Do you want to tell us a little bit of background, Zach, on who they are and what it is? And also, I mean, you go into it, but your trip down there and the fantastic building that you visited.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, so last Friday, I got to go down to my old hometown of Portland, Oregon. So I hopped onto the Amtrak train in Seattle and took the train down there. It's a slow train, but it was beautiful out, beautiful views of Mount Rainier and Mount Hood. It was great. and got a chance to visit the folks at the New Buildings Institute in their new office at the PAE Living Building, which is Portland's first full certified Living Building Challenge building. It's right in the historic section of downtown Portland. Really nice. I think probably 5-story building. Really, really beautiful and fun to visit and learn about. When I was there, I got to have a conversation with Mark Lyles, who we'll hear from in just a moment. He's the senior project manager there at New Buildings Institute, and then also was able to do an impromptu interview with their CEO, Ralph Danola, who will feature next week in an interview. The New Buildings Institute is a think tank and center of thought leadership around buildings and energy efficiency in buildings, building decarbonization, and codes. And so we in the conversation with Mark, we learn more about that, some specific work that he's doing with the IECC around the International Energy Code, as well as his participation with ASHRAE and their passive building standard, which is called ASHRAE 227P, that I think will start getting some real details rolling out in the next year. And that's super exciting. This is a very exciting time for them because IRA just passed, and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, includes, I think, nearly $1 billion that's going to be dedicated to assisting states and local jurisdictions in upping their game on building code, so improving their building energy codes, and a lot of that work will be based on work that New Buildings Institute has already done. They have their building decarbonization code that they've already developed, and so they're about to be, I think, at the kind of center of this really exciting storm of building code innovation and improvement. So I got a chance to catch up with Mark and learn a little bit more about that in our conversation.
Well, let's get into it. We'll put some links to the New Buildings Institute and also to the PAE Living Building in the show notes. You can check those out. But for now, here's your interview with Mark Lyles.
Well, I have Mark Lyles here, who's Senior Project Manager at New Buildings Institute. Mark has been just a critically important thinker around building energy efficiency and code, and New Buildings Institute is a vitally important organization. So it's a pleasure to have you on the Passive House podcast, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Zach. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. And I know today, so we are actually right now sitting in the conference room on floor 3 of the PAE Living Building, which is also home to New Building Institute's headquarters, right? Your offices.
Yep.
And it's this is the first time I've been here. It's, I think, Oregon's first living building, fully certified, all pedals. Living building, right?
Yep. Net zero.
Yeah.
The whole bit.
Yeah. Composting toilets.
Yes.
And everything. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's beautiful. We're all sorts of what is this, Neil? Is this NLT that we're looking at? These beams? CLT beams. So cross laminated timber beams, lots of natural wood everywhere, and light, and it's the air is beautifully fresh, and it's great to be here. So this is a treat to both to be in this building and also to be able to be in person on a podcast interview, because so many of these are usually online. So this is fun. Could we start off the conversation just diving in a little bit into your story, what the journey that you've gone through to be where you are now at MBI?
Sure. I've been at MBI for a long time now. When I was hired, we were still on the other side of the river from Portland. The office was in Vancouver, Washington, in a historic barn. So, going from that to this building, it's been part of that journey, certainly. But I was hired when Dave Hewitt was still our executive director. So that was the executive director before Ralph came on. And Mark Frankel was our technical director, and they were the two folks that kind of hired me. And I kind of started as a project analyst, doing a lot of research. We were a much smaller organization than we are now. We hadn't kind of really defined a lot of our programmatic areas to the degree that we have now as we've grown. And kind of just did a lot of things, as I think a lot of people who've worked for nonprofits know. You wear a lot of different hats. So kind of had like a broad experience working on a lot of different things, including, one of the, I think, big studies that MBI is well known for is the performance of LEED certified buildings. That report had just been released when I was hired. So there was some additional pieces there that I was involved in researching, looking specifically at LEED buildings. And then, I think as my role has grown within the organization, the way that we work, we pull a lot of the elements in terms of market development, market leadership around net zero, and program innovation, and really kind of encapsulate that in the codes work that we do. Moving codes forward has always been like part of the DNA of MBI. That's, really why the organization was actually founded, was to really advance codes. But we do it in an interesting way where we're pulling from these different elements. And so as I've grown into the organization and taken more of a role within the codes team, working with Jim, Mark Frankel when he was our technical director, as well as other folks, it's been great to kind of get more involved in that. And now I'm serving as a voting member of the IECC, the International Energy Conservation Code Residential Committee. So I'm on that committee, and I'm also on the ASHRAE Passive Design Standard 227. So those are kind of the two areas where I'm most involved right now.
Yeah, a couple of the most important places to be involved on the planet around building efficiency and code. And let's get into that. Before, could you just do a really top level overview of that report, the findings of the report on LEED buildings? I know it's been a while, but I know it was so kind of important in a lot of conversations. Yeah,
sure. And that's, actually one of the, I went and heard Mark Frankel present on the findings of that report. And I think, just really high level, LEED was relatively new. I think USGBC was kind of really interested in kind of understanding, how these buildings, that were meeting that certification were performing, especially when it came to energy. And I think that the findings were a little bit surprising in that in some cases, a lot of them were performing very well. In other cases, some of the things maybe were not kind of performing to the degree that they would hope for.
Right.
And I think that, we always have to kind of look at this data that data is really important to the work that we do. And we need to look at the data critically and understand, all right, was the building not properly commissioned? Is there something going on with the control system? There's, for every building, right, there's that data provides valuable insight. And I think that for those buildings that had gotten LEED certification, but were maybe not kind of measuring up to the level of performance they were designed to, there was a need to go back and kind of review or do some kind of post-commissioning process to true it up.
Right, and understand why.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So IECC. So you're a voting member of IECC, and I think today is a kind of a very important day for you around and all of us around the process at IECC, and I think probably it also could give flesh out for listeners the role that MBI plays in this, all these processes. Could you fill us in on today and
Sure.
and all that?
Yeah, no, it's this has been a busy day for me, but The work has started a long time ago, actually, in terms of developing. It was last fall. October was the initial deadline to generate proposals for the International Energy Conservation Code for the residential provisions within that. Us and a lot of other organizations kind of submitted proposals to advance the code. And now we've gone through that process, and the folks that serve on that committee have voted essentially on those initial proposals. And that document now has been published. It's called the Public Comment Draft Number 1. And it really is kind of our first insight into what are the changes that are advancing energy efficiency as well as electrification for the first time, which is really exciting from what was in the 2021 IECC. So, and the deadline today was to look at what was published, initially approved in the public comment draft, which means that it was it met 2/3 majority of the voting members approved of that. And this is the opportunity for the public at large to look at this document and say, provide input on kind of what those measures or those requirements are. So that deadline was today. And obviously we've been very involved in this process. And for this deadline specifically, not only I think in terms of putting in technical comments, but also our role in terms of, I think, providing some, trying to make it less opaque. Energy codes can be very opaque and I think difficult to understand. And one of the roles that we see is trying to make it a little bit more accessible so that the public at large, or, even folks who are just concerned with the climate can weigh in and realize that they have a voice. So, that was the deadline today. So in addition to the work that we were doing on our technical public comments, we were also, we did a webinar. I have a blog post that was out there talking about how to participate in the process, and and just a lot of collaboration with other kind of efficiency-minded organizations.
Right. Get as many voices involved in advocating for progress, probably. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fantastic. So one of the things that I have always really admired about MBI is the just the focus, the sustained focus, and kind of elevating of the importance of energy efficiency, building energy efficiency in decarbonization. And I know that and I say that as a passive house guy, right? Right. Because passive house is all about energy efficiency. So there, it's not a mystery why, but maybe you could share a little bit about why you see energy efficiency as so important.
Yeah. I think that historically, if you look at the history of MBI, and the work that we've done in codes, it's always been about advancing energy efficiency within our buildings.
Yeah.
And I'd say shortly after I started, we noticed there was a real uptake in interest, and a lot of this was kind of coming out of California in the idea around net zero, right? So, and I think kind of early on, there was an excitement that was kind of built into net zero because it had to do with this absolute, it was something that was kind of easy to understand. And I think it captivated a lot of people. And we had the renewable side of it, and then you have that are offsetting basically your building energy consumption. We always said that, there's a loading order, right, to net zero. Like you have to start with, your vegetables first, which is your energy efficiency. So work on decreasing your building loads as much as possible by investing in energy efficiency. So the amount of energy that you have to offset to meet your net zero goal is as small as it possibly can be. That's always kind of been our focus and kind of our mantra. But I think that in sometimes, in the kind of ramp up, right, to meet our net zero goals, which are now kind of net zero carbon and kind of looking like very broadly, it can be tough to kind of carry that nugget of energy efficiency forward, and how important that is to like all of this that we're talking about. And that's what really kind of brought me to Passive House in terms of my personal experience was, we're talking a lot about energy, our net zero. We're working on net zero codes. And for me, it was hard to always say with absolute certainty that like this is the best that we can do in terms of energy efficiency. And when I came across Passive House, that was kind of what really was my aha moment, was like, here is a standard that really gets that. And we can really take that because it's baked into that standard, the energy efficiency standard. And as we kind of continue to talk about net zero codes and our work that we're doing, that becomes kind of the North Star for that efficiency component of it. So for me, that was kind of like more of a personal experience and an aha moment. And, but it's played out in all different kinds of ways. We do code work all across the country. And, for me, even just the thermal bridging requirements that are part of Passive House. So, there's nothing in energy codes right now that really addresses the thermal bridging and what the impact on your envelope is as a result of that. So, even just that kind of incremental step of saying, how do we do better about addressing thermal bridging within the code framework that we have, that is really important. And that's kind of just like one piece that I pulled in from Passive House in the work that we're doing.
Yeah. And you and I were just talking about Bronwyn's great Bronwyn Berry's great conversation with Matthew Cutler Welsh a couple of weeks ago. And she was sharing details from the presentation she made for the COP27.
Yeah.
And one of the things she's talked about was how Passive House can help create these little ecosystems of practice around things like thermal bridging, and how so she was exploring and kind of explaining the mutually kind of reinforcing and supportive role that Passive House and the more kind of incremental progress that you see in energy code development can play with one another. So that's cool to hear that. And so what about the relationship between Passive House and energy code, and this conundrum of the performance-based Passive House approach versus the prescriptive code-based approach that is typically what we see in energy code? Like, is that something that we are going to eventually need to harmonize, or how do you see the future hopefully unfolding for energy code?
Yeah, you're asking me to look into my crystal ball.
Yes, indeed. If anyone has a crystal ball, it's you, Mark Lyles.
It's been a challenge, certainly, and I'm not going to hold back. I think in terms of the broader adoption of Passive House, especially when it comes to energy codes, that has been a huge barrier that we're having to address. Yeah. We're seeing it kind of shake out in a couple different ways. I think that what's really cool is like, all right, we've been having this conversation for a little while now. And as like Passive House kind of interest and adoption has grown, especially I'd say in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And so we can look at what's happening in New York State. We can look at what's happening in Massachusetts. Both those states now have kind of, are hard on the track, right, to incorporating Passive House elements within their energy codes. In Massachusetts, it's a little bit more explicit, where it's an alternative compliance path. Basically, if you get your certification from PHI or FIAS, then you don't have to do the rest of the code compliance stuff. You're good to go. In New York, it's a little bit more behind the scenes. And I think that kind of that tension, right, between the prescriptive versus the performance elements of the code, where Massachusetts is saying, we trust that that's going to be the truth, right? That this building is going to be more efficient than an energy code, level performance, our performing building. But in New York, it's the way that they're addressing that tension is that, they're taking what we know, in terms of the prescriptive requirements, and a lot of this has come out of FIAS, where they've, for the first time kind of introduced a prescriptive pathway.
Right.
And we're using that as a starting point for what the prescriptive requirements are in the code. So there's some borrowing there in terms of like that work and that technical work that FIAS has done a great job of kind of, putting out there and doing the analysis. So there's, we're pulling in, I'm certainly borrowing from that as part of that kind of code development process. So, I think that probably the answer is in between those like two models. Like we can't say like, all right, we're just going to assume that everyone can model, and then we'll let, the standard kind of be a performance only standard. We do need to kind of also have those prescriptive, pieces come along as part of that process. And, I think that as we kind of continue to do this work, we have to like continue to tune what those prescriptive requirements are. So, what's really fascinating about the code is, right, it's a very kind of blunt tool, right? It's like, all right, as a designer, you think about kind of like, all right, like an envelope for a school versus, some other kind of building, and you're going to come up with a different solution, rain screen, non-rain screen, masonry, but the code doesn't really kind of look at that, right? So we need to make sure that the prescriptive elements can kind of work in a broad range of scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some tuning there that needs to happen in terms of like what we've learned from the passive house experience.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think a major motivation for FIAS in creating the prescriptive pathway was to aid in scaling up the adoption of passive house, and because not everybody can model, and we can't expect all buildings to go through the modeling process. So, that therefore makes sense that you would be borrowing from that, because that's what could potentially make it more palatable for adoption in code.
Absolutely.
There'd be a lot of push. I could see, right, there's probably potentially a lot of pushback of if you're going to force us to do full energy models for every house. Yeah. So you alluded to ASHRAE 227P, and it is a phenomenally exciting to look at it from outside. And this potential for this passive building. What would it be? A standard, or
it's a standard? So it's going through
ASHRAE.
the ASHRAE standard.
So
development process.
What's new? I mean, maybe just a description of who's involved in that work, and where it looks like it might be headed.
Yeah, it's a really exciting. It's been a long time coming. I think it's been almost 4 years now since the ASHRAE kind of approved the standard setting process for the development of the standard. It's been, I came to it relatively new to, I hadn't really served on kind of any other ASHRAE standards. I hadn't joined the IECC process yet. So I was kind of like new to me, in terms of like how this whole process works. And, it's very collaborative, in terms of the members. There's, we have good representation from, all across kind of the passive house landscape.
Yep.
We have Graham is a voting member on
Graham Wright from FIAS.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been, we've once again, we've borrowed heavily from the standard. But, I'd say that the way that it's manifesting itself is, there's a focus on, end use. So putting limits on the end uses of different components within the building.
Mm-hmm.
So, at the heart of passive house is, you're driving, envelope improvements by giving yourself kind of a budget or on the amount of energy that you can use for heating and cooling.
Right.
So that's similar in some degree, but it's a little bit more detailed, and you're looking at it for a whole range of kind of end uses, hot water, plug loads, all of those things.
Oh, okay.
And then kind of once you have kind of that budget established, it's a little bit more of a simplified approach. And there is kind of that end use analysis or the budget that you have to work with, but then there will also be there's been a strong push for a prescriptive pathway as well, and folks really kind of realizing what that looks like. But it's going to be a little bit different than kind of what people might be used to from kind of the other ASHRAE and IECC standards. So we're still kind of working on getting the public comment draft published. It has to go through all the ASHRAE channels. So I can only tease it a little bit, so to speak. But we're getting closer, which feels really exciting, and looking forward to kind of getting that out there and getting people's feedback on it. So
and you alluded to the full kind of spectrum of passive house folks, and you mentioned Graham Wright from FIAS, and I think Jessica Grove-Smith is involved from PHI. Is that right?
She's not officially on, but she's joined like different working groups that I've been a part on.
Right.
So it's been, having input from, even internationally has been awesome. So that's been great.
Yeah. So, not necessarily diving into any more detail, because I understand that, that's not, that we're not ready yet, but when it is completed, what is the what influence could this potentially have on the landscape of the code landscape? Where could this be a big deal?
It could be a very big deal. I think other barriers that we've seen to passive house adoption is that the WFI plus, WFI, the modeling software that is really kind of the backbone, PHPP and WFI for the standards, is not ANSI certified, right? So in terms of any kind of modeling report that might be spit out from those programs, code officials cannot, unless a state like Massachusetts says like, all right, we're going to stamp that and say that's okay. But generally, like for an ASHRAE or an IECC, unless it's an ANSI kind of tool agreed process, then they can't really incorporate those elements within the code. So what this changes is that once ASHRAE has published this standard and it's an ANSI standard, that barrier does no longer exist, right? So anyone can go and say like, all right, here is a passive design standard that kind of has that target of passive house, and they can adopt it. So it's huge. So in terms of like all those like legal kind of rigmaroles and like, I think challenges that might potentially exist from kind of a legal perspective, that kind of ANSI standard process really kind of alleviates those concerns.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it comes from ASHRAE, which is a famously careful and thorough and conservative body.
Right.
So I imagine there will be just a lot of credibility then lent to the standard.
Yeah. And I think all the work that you've done and other jurisdictions, the work that Bronwyn's doing, I think through the kind of policy arm that she's involved with through the Passive House Network, it's just kind of like there's, excitement churning, I feel like, for something like this. And, it's once we get it out there, I think that it will just kind of, help kind of, get on that that bullet train that she was talking
Right,
about.
right, exactly. High speed rail.
Right.
I just came down here on low speed rail on the Amtrak. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're ready for more speed.
Yes.
For sure. Cool. That's really encouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's up next for you, for MBI? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to continue to do the work that we're doing. I still get a kind of close-up view every day of kind of the gap that exists between where we want to be and where we currently are, even if it's in the 2024 IECC. Yeah. There's a lot of headroom still for improvement there. So just going to keep kind of scrapping, trying to pull in different elements that we can really to advance the model codes. We have to be mindful, right? We're moving forward with energy efficiency kind of as that priority, but like we also have to make sure that our buildings are electrifying as we go forward at the same time. So making sure that we're pulling in elements around making sure we're electric ready in most cases. In the new construction that we're doing are all electric ideally. How is that being addressed in our codes and standards? And then the other one that we're kind of really focusing on is resilience. How are the codes addressing resilient features within buildings? Because right now that is a huge gap. And also another benefit associated with going for passive house. So, I think, being able to respond to smoke events, power outages, understanding kind of the health impacts from ventilation. These are all things that we're trying to be better and really kind of build into our framework in terms of the code work that we're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So resilience is about indoor air quality and passive survivability with I imagine both for not getting too cold, but also not baking during these weird heat dome events. Yeah.
So yeah, there's much to be done there, and I think we're kind of only starting to realize what else could be done there. So we have a couple abstracts in for papers that we kind of want to continue to explore this, and the energy code is a huge opportunity. So yeah.
Well, good luck with this cycle that just kind of got completed today. I hope that goes well. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close up?
No, I'm very thankful for the Passive House community and the work that you've done. I think that when we talk about the energy code, we talk about something that every designer and builder kind of has to interact with and engage with, and it's not always kind of the most pleasant experience for a lot of people, but I think that as we look at the climate and the climate crisis that we're experiencing, and the fact that we have kind of this solution, this passive house solution at our disposal, I think it's a great opportunity, and I really appreciate kind of all the work that you and your team are doing, and all the folks at FIAS and PHI, and just kind of getting the word out there. So.
Yeah. I feel very grateful for all of those folks too. And I'm very grateful, Mark, for your work and for the work of MBI. It's just so important, and I'm so happy you're doing it. Yep. So thank you.
Thank you, Zach.
All right, Mark Lyles there, Senior Project Manager at New Buildings Institute. Great chat, Zach. I'm very pleased that you took the train down there and had that experience. I understand you took a video as well while you were there.
Yes, I did. So shortly after I interviewed Mark and then Ralph Tanola, I got a tour from Ralph of the building itself. And so, yes, I'll be sharing that probably at some point in January, so that folks can get a kind of firsthand view of this really cool building.
Yeah. I mean, for now, people can, if you just search up PAE Living Building, you'll find a bunch of stories and images. And there has been some. Was there a live on the accelerator? It's been featured on the accelerator before.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We should include a link in the show notes. Yeah, the project team presented about it.
It's very cool here. I mean, we often hear about people's journey towards Passive House beginning with LEED and the integration of LEED and Passive House, but Living Building is kind of the ultimate. it's the next step, including the composting toilets.
Yes, including. Mm-hmm.
But it's just a whole nother level of overall sustainability, and it's great hearing about the success of integrating Passive House to fulfill the energy and comfort component of that, because they do play very nicely together.
Yeah, I feel like Passive House and Living Building are cousins, I just feel like they're kindred spirits for sure. I mean, you're right that Living Building, with all of the pedals and the fact that it's basically net zero in three ways. It's net zero energy, net zero water, and net zero waste. I mean, it's really ambitious. So it's broader and kind of it's like, you could think of it as the moonshot of green building. But the way that I feel like it's really a kindred spirit with Passive House is it's just a real focus on real world performance. And also that I feel like they're really complementary, because with Living Building, the energy pedal is net zero. It's like, I think 105% of net zero energy, right? And Passive House is that's a target. And then Passive House provides a means to do that in an affordable and predictable way. So they really work hand in hand together. And there are formal relationships actually between LBC and both FIAS and PHI certifications in what they call crosswalks. So there's just a lot of cool overlap and integration there.
Yeah, and I guess the overarching thing that we're seeing is a coming of age, or people realizing beyond just us and the people who listen to the show, but the value that Passive House can play to achieving all these wider goals, particularly around carbon, but also other energy and health and wellness goals. That Passive House often comes up as a really good solution, reliable solution to achieve those performance requirements or standards elsewhere. And also on the policy side, it's been a bit of a theme for us recently. You mentioned the chat we had with Bronwyn working in that space, and it's so good hearing about people who are starting to develop policy now, bringing in people with Passive House experience and realising that can play a really valuable part in policies that will address things like decarbonisation, and also electrification is part of that for the purpose of decarbonising. But I really like that idea of efficiency first, which is such a big part of Passive House. We've mentioned the ASHRAE standard briefly in the past, but I think it's worth highlighting why I'm interested in it, because it's not just American. A lot of international standards point to things like ASHRAE as a really solid reference for some of the metrics and some of the performance criteria. So if you dig deep enough, even in the New Zealand Building Code, and then the clauses of our building code refer to standards, and then those standards often refer to things like ASHRAE and some of the tables and other ASHRAE standards. So the impact of ASHRAE is really significant and has this ripple effect throughout the world, really. So to have the development of this Passive House, this passive ASHRAE standard is really exciting. I think it's going to be a really significant change across building codes around the world.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's just so much credibility, and applicability to, around the world. It is super exciting. I'm anxious for it
it's a
to
long
get out
process.
there.
Yeah, it's a lot. And he alluded to the fact that, it's taken, I think, 4 years up to this point. And even, the first step was getting approval for a committee to be formed. So I can imagine that might cause some frustration for some go-getter engineers and architects who just want to get things done because the answer seems obvious. But that's the reality, I think, of policy work, is there's a lot of talking about what you're going to talk about, and then telling people what you talked about, and then getting consensus. It does take time, but the strength of that consensus, once you have it, is pretty significant.
I thought it was really interesting that they're grappling also with this whole performance and prescriptive conundrum, and actually cribbing some prescriptive passive house ideas from the work that FIAS is doing on its has done on its prescriptive standard for the work in ASHRAE. So I'm really super curious to see how that plays out. And I think that we're all the reason that this ASHRAE standard is particularly exciting is the promise that it brings for scaling passive house. I think that's what we're really eager to see happen. And there is this interesting relationship between making stuff simple and prescriptive and making it more scalable, but also a tension there, because one of the brilliant things about passive house is the modeling and the kind of design iterations you can do up front with PHPP or with Woofy Passive. So it's just it's pretty fascinating.
I can imagine, in fact, I know there are some already in the passive house community that might be a little bit nervous about that prescriptive.
Yeah.
Because essentially, for those who haven't heard that term, what we're talking about is it means you don't have to do a model, or it's our equivalent would be a schedule method where you can basically say, if you put in this amount of insulation and you have this amount of airflow or ventilation rate and this level of air tightness, then you should be good.
Right.
That's basically a lot.
Right. No, it is, but it's kind of what Energy Code does, right? They have these, they specify these requirements. Yeah.
So it's a different philosophy to having to do a bespoke energy model and test every building on every specific location. So I imagine, but like you say, the advantage of that is it cuts down the time and the cost to get a higher level performance. But it is there's a philosophical debate, I think, there to be had as to whether you want to go down that path or with passive house or not.
Yep.
Good stuff. Anything else? Any other outtakes from you from that interview with Mark?
No, I'm excited for them, and I'm really I'm happy that they're doing their work. I'm a big fan of their continued focus and championing of building energy efficiency as a key tool in building decarbonization. So awesome. It's great to see what they've accomplished so far, and I think they have 30 or so staff, something like that, and they're growing, and it's going to be a big year for them. So.
Looks like they're hiring, and they're going to need more staff if they get some of that funding to do some of that great work.
Yeah.
And we've got another interview coming up next week with another important person at the Buildings Institute. So looking forward to that again next week as well.
Yeah. Stay tuned for Ralph Denola next week.
Yes. Awesome stuff. All right. And in the meantime, what else is going on at the Accelerator?
Yeah, well, we have we're kind of quiet for the holidays on events right now. Of course, you can check out all sorts of Passive House podcast episodes, and we're almost to 200,000 downloads. We'll hit that probably in early January, unless people really get crazy over the holiday break.
Out on those
exactly.
New Year's road trips.
Yeah, I think we're a few thousand away from that. So that's a cool milestone. So the next big event that we have is the kickoff of our 2023 programming. So we will launch the new version of Passive House Accelerator Live on Wednesday the 11th. So that's Thursday the 12th in New Zealand and Australia. This time that we're shifting the time, which is a big deal. So, which actually is going to make it a little tough, I think, definitely for folks in Australia, but it's going to be pretty early in New Zealand. So we're moving the time.
Be a breakfast session.
Early breakfast. We're going to be moving the time from 7 p.m. Eastern to noon Eastern. So that's 9 a.m. Pacific, what makes it pretty darn early in the morning for you. And we are doing, we're launching a new series within the Passive House Accelerator Live. So on every second Wednesday, we will have our brand new next gen episodes. So next gen refers to the next generation of practitioners in Passive House, and it's going to be hosted by Zoe Kaufman of NREL and Carmel Pratt of Bright Power, two powerhouses of practice and thought leadership, and also members of the next generation of leaders in the space. And they're going to, for the first episode, so they'll have a special guest at every episode, except for the first episode, which will be presentations by the two of them, followed by lively Q&A. So that's going to be again on January 11th. So we are no Passive House events from now until January 11th. We'll kick it off, and then the third Wednesday will be Project Showcase. The fourth Wednesday will be Construction Tech, and then the first Wednesday, and we'll hit that first one of those in February. That will be our 101 series. So we're going to have awesome content that'll be great for people who are new to Passive House. So please join us.
Great. Good stuff. All right. Well, I think this is our final show for 2022.
Oh my gosh, it is.
Yeah.
Matthew, thank you. This is such an honor to do this with you. It's great.
Well, yeah, likewise. It's a great privilege, and I'm glad that you made the trip. We can keep some good content going during the holidays. But we will be back again next week for our first episode of the new year. So until then, have a great New Year's, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, Happy New Year.